And when I met Watu, she didn't actually remember that we met in Rio, because back then, she probably doesn't have the memory that I was wearing flip-flops and shorts in a weather that was a bit like this. And now I'm a little bit more better dressed than I was back then. But let's make this as informal as possible, and please engage throughout instead of just letting me talk for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, nonstop. Please feel free to engage throughout. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about this research, but before we get started, I would like to introduce you to my favorite emoji and ask you a question. What do you think are the obstacles that prevent diarrhea medicines from being found in low-income regions? So some of you may know, diarrhea is the second biggest killer of children under the age of 5 in many low-income countries around the world. The medicine is a combination called ORS, oral rehydration salts. It comes in a sachet. You dilute in a little bit of water and dispense to the child. And zinc, a tablet that the child can take. It's important to take both. The medicine is extremely cheap. People living in extreme poverty could afford, because it costs not even $1. It's over the counter. There's no overdosage. It can be sold in any outlet. It doesn't need to be sold in a pharmacy. It doesn't require refrigeration as well, like vaccines, for example, that are so difficult to move around. So why can't this medicine that is so cheap and so easily available, not available where it's needed the most? Can someone help me out? What are the obstacles? Yes? Transportation. Exactly. Transportation, definitely one of them. Poor infrastructure, logistics, getting the medicines there is pretty challenging. And also the populations in low-income countries are not necessarily as urbanized as in high-income countries. So they are more scattered, and that creates more challenges as well to distribute the medicine all over the country. What else?
Perhaps knowledge that this is what you should take if you get.
So awareness, yes, definitely. Many people don't know that the medicine even exists. And also because it's not found there, they will not necessarily be aware about the medicine or how to dispense the medicine. Anything else? Yes?
Finances?
Finance, definitely. So if the medicine could be afforded by people even through the private sector, so in that sense, if you can make that medicine available and it makes sense for everyone to distribute and to sell the medicine, finance is not a big issue, but through the public sector, it's a really big issue. And funding is intermittent as well. For the ones who work in development, you may know that sometimes, well, now under Trump, you probably saw what's happening with the development budgets. But even during more normal times, sometimes there's a lot of money for something and then the money disappears and then there's money for something else, right? So it's unstable as well. Anyone else?
Anti-medicines and anti-vaccination.
Oh, can you elaborate a little bit?
Yes, you might have the distribution, the finances, but then you find that culturally the medicines are not accepted.
Exactly, yeah, the medicines sometimes are not accepted, even if they are widely available. That's more a problem for vaccines. So for example, the polio vaccine faced that challenge in some countries, like in the northern region of Nigeria, in Pakistan. For diarrhea medicine, it's not a huge problem, but it's something to be aware of.
I didn't get number 2, but this may be the same. Cross-border bureaucracy.
Cross-border bureaucracy, definitely, because if you are importing some of these medicines, and we're talking about countries that might be unstable, so imagine if inflation rates go up or if the exchange rates change abruptly, it will impact access to the medicines. We don't yes? I will have to run with.
Corruption and control. People need this, so there's an incentive for people to control and corruption avenues to control supply.
Yeah, so through the public sector, corruption happens, of course, and especially at the central level to distribute the medicine to remote regions. Also, remember that in some low-income countries, if let's say that you have a child with diarrhea, you're a caregiver, and you're gonna have to take your child to the nearest health clinic. The clinic might be 15, 20 kilometers from your house. You don't have a car, there's no bus, there's nothing, right? You have to walk with a child with severe diarrhea. You would probably rather go to the private outlet and buy the medicine yourself. And even if you go to the clinic, sometimes they stock out, right? So this is what we call a complex problem. It doesn't have to be a big problem, as Watu described, but it means that there are many root causes. It's difficult to identify a single cause to that problem. We usually think in terms of, okay, this is a big problem, it's a complex problem. We identify the obstacles like we just did, and then you try to tackle them. So you try to improve infrastructure, you try to improve awareness, right? That's the immediate approach we have towards problem solving. What I'm gonna try to show you is a more resourceful and more immediate way of addressing the problems, that instead of tackling obstacles, you work around them. Is that okay? Let me show this example that I worked with in Zambia. It's an organization called Cola Life, an organization with 2 people only and a budget that was very, very small. And they realized that these medicines were not found in remote regions, but Coca-Cola is found everywhere. Has anyone here been in a remote region before? Yes, Kath.
Middle of Lake Victoria.
Middle of Lake Victoria. Did you find Coca-Cola?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I remember after working with this case, I remembered when I worked as a consultant and I had a project in the Brazilian Amazon that I had to take a boat for hours and went to this region where traditional populations lived, and they gave me fish and cassava, all the local things, and they opened this bottle of Coca-Cola. And I thought that the bottle was out of place, but they saw opportunity in these bottles that are available everywhere. If Coca-Cola is found everywhere, why can't we piggyback on Coca-Cola's distribution channel to make these medicines available as well? The idea they had at the beginning was, this is the medicine. They started feeding the medicines between the bottles in a Coca-Cola crate. You probably know the Coca-Cola crate with the glass bottles, to take a free ride with the bottles to reach remote regions. And that was the beginning of an intervention that increased the uptake of the medicine from less than 1% to about 50% in many districts in Zambia. Again, very resourceful, within a few years, reaching an amazing result. They didn't, again, improve infrastructure, awareness, all these things that you were talking about. They didn't tackle the obstacles. They worked around them. And the essence here is, we don't have to think of global health, for example, only with the means of global health. If there's fast-moving consumer goods and that system works really well, why can't we address a problem in health by leveraging what exists and works so well in fast-moving consumer goods? So this is just a taster of what I talk about when I talk about workarounds. But let me now tell you about how I bumped into workarounds, because I didn't know about workarounds. As you probably realized, English is not my first language, and workarounds was not even within my vocabulary when I started this research. But I was interested in how computer hackers hack complex systems. Because even though I'm not a hacker myself, I saw computer hackers breaking into these complex computational systems with very limited knowledge about cybersecurity systems and making change like this. So my idea was, these are complex systems, computational systems. Can we learn from computer hackers and approach problems in health systems, education systems, other systems that I care about in a hacky way? And that was the beginning of my research. I worked with many computer hackers to see how they hacked a complex system. And then they pretty much told me, well, a few things. First, that I was wrong, that my assumption that I could learn from hackers and transpose that to other systems was wrong, because they said that hacking is not exclusive to computer systems, that people were hacking all kinds of systems, that people like this were hackers. So they pointed me to some cases of hackers that were not computational, people that were doing things like this. And they also told me about workarounds. Does anyone know what's the name of the most notorious computer hack? Anyone? Huh? It's the most famous one is called Trojan horse. Do you know the Greek myth that this hack is named after? Can someone help me out? What is the idea? Yes.
They wanted to infiltrate a system, and so they hid a bunch of soldiers inside the Trojan horse and just left it there looking like they had disappeared so that they would bring the soldiers inside the city without knowing that they were soldiers.
Exactly. So if you're trying to break the wall or the gates of a walled city and you can't find a way in, there might be other ways to get in that don't necessarily require tackling the obstacle. You can work around them. And they showed me that, how they did that in computer systems. But again, I wasn't necessarily interested in computer systems. I was interested in tackling complex sustainability challenges and seeing how we can do that better. But hackers helped me with that. And then after working with hackers, they pointed me to some cases of people that were hacking complex sustainability challenges. I traveled to 9 countries, collected a lot of data, and then did what we all researchers do. You come back with a lot of data and get a big cup of coffee or something that can get you going and try to find patterns across the data that I had gotten. And I identified that across all these cases that I collected data from, there were 4 workarounds, 4 ways to approach complex challenges. And I'm going to try to walk you through some of the key elements for that so that you can see how you can possibly approach your own problems in similar ways. The first one I call the piggyback. You have already seen a case of piggyback. I'm going to show you another one. Would you like to choose one, M-Pesa or Airbnb? Whoever shouts first wins. M-Pesa. Okay, does anyone know M-Pesa? What to? Yeah. So M-Pesa is a business that is now a multi-billion-dollar business, but it started with telecom companies. Do you know Vodafone, everyone? So Vodafone owns shares of a company in Kenya, Tanzania, and other countries in Africa called Safaricom. And they were very interested in approaching new business models. They realized that back then, when they started the business, only 5% of people in Kenya had access to bank accounts. If you don't have bank accounts, imagine how constrained you are. It's not only your payments, but if you have transfer money to your parents, or if they're transferring you money, for example, you can't do that. You need to do that with cash. If they live in a different city, you have to find someone who's going to take a bus with a bag of cash. And imagine that for businesses, for micro businesses, how challenging that is as well to work only with cash. The problem is that banking is really expensive. Banking is also very regulated, and it involves big infrastructure. So imagine tackling that problem. You have to build banking infrastructure in many regions around the country and make that much cheaper. That involves physical infrastructure that is very costly, ATMs, digital infrastructure. It's really costly to build that. So what was the workaround? It was a telecom company that was pretty much everywhere in Kenya. And by that time, pretty much everyone in the country had access to mobile phones. Do you remember those Nokia mobile phones that you play the snake game?
They're too young.
Oh, yeah, they're too young. Okay, so some of you may remember those mobile phones, but the ones that didn't have internet, they had those phones. And more people still today have access to mobile phones than toilets, right? So it's that common to have mobile phones. And people usually go to shops like this with the phones, and then they top up the phones. It's pay as you go. And these sellers are everywhere in the country. In every village, you can find a seller like this. You give them cash, they top up your phone, and then you can make calls and messages. And then they said, if there's this entire infrastructure in place, can we use that to provide financial services? So in other words, the same way you go there to top up your phone, you can just add virtual money to your telecom account, your Safaricom account. And then you use that same phone to, if I'm buying this phone from you or this glass, I can transfer you money from my mobile phone to yours. And that bypasses the need for bank accounts in many ways. And that grew really, really, really fast. It's now a multi-billion-dollar business, and mobile banking is everywhere in Africa now, in East Europe, South Asia. You see how a workaround can be impactful. It can create an entirely new business model. It can leverage different value chains to address pressing sustainability challenges. And the essence here is, look across systems. You can address a problem in finance by looking at what exists in telecom. You can address a problem in healthcare by looking at what exists in fast-moving consumer goods. You can crisscross them. You don't have, we very often look through the lenses of scarcity, right? We look at problems and think, what is missing here? What is lacking here? And that very often constrains us to look at what exists, but might be in different systems. So that's the essence of the piggyback. Is that okay, everyone? Okay? So let me walk you through the second workaround, the one that I call the loophole. And because it's about working around rules, it's a bit controversial. And I'm gonna share with you a case that is a bit politically controversial. And I don't want to get into the ethics, so whether you agree or disagree, I want to show you the approach, okay? This organization here on the left was formed by a group of feminist women in the Netherlands that think that people should get abortion services on demand. So they think that people should be allowed to get an abortion service if they want to, okay? That was the premise that they started with. And they realized that the obstacle that prevents them from getting what they want is the legislation of the country where they reside. So for example, if they reside here in the UK, they can, it's legal. So they can get a legal and safe abortion service. If they are in Brazil, the country where I'm from, they can't because it's not legal. So it's pretty much the legislation of where you reside that constrains you from getting a safe and legal abortion service. So what's the workaround that they did? They rented a boat from the Netherlands. You can see here the flag of the boat. And they sail to places where abortion is illegal. So let's say they go to Brazil or to Poland, to some states in the United States. And then people who want to get an abortion service can go on board and they sail to international waters, which is about 12 miles off coast. So it's not that far from the coastline. Takes not even 30, 40 minutes. In international waters, what is the legislation that applies? The boat, the flag of the boat. In other words, in international waters, if they are sailing that boat, the legislation that applies is the Dutch legislation. And because it's a pro-choice legislation, they can offer a legal and safe abortion service to people who are on board. And then take them back to where they reside without transgressing any laws. They're not liable for that. That was just the first loophole that they used. This organization has used so many loopholes, such as, for example, sending an abortive pill that is extremely effective, 95% effective, to people who reside in countries where abortion is illegal. And they send with a prescription of a Dutch doctor, because the pill was developed for ulcers originally, and abortion is a side effect. They send that as a medicine for ulcers, and then people take that medicine, and if they have any issue, any health issue, they can go to the medical doctor still, and they're not going to be liable because the symptoms of an abortion induced with that medicine is exactly the same of a miscarriage. So there's no liability for them to do so. And this loophole is used in many different contexts. I very often try to bring cases of these scrappy organizations like Women on Waves. But Uber, for example, started like this. Uber never associated themselves with taxis. They didn't say in the beginning, oh, this is a taxi, but using a map, because taxis are highly regulated by city councils. So they leverage the ambiguity of the legal system by saying it's sharing economy. It's people giving rights but getting some money for this. And it's a new technology that has not been yet regulated. And they did that in a way that was pretty clever, whether you agree ethically with that or not. They invested massively in growing the company. And one of the reasons for that was because when legislators tried to ban Uber, in the words of many legislators, Uber became too big to ban. Because when they tried to do that, Uber sent drivers and sent users to the doorstep of legislators to protest against. So even though they thought that it should have been banned, they wouldn't be able to because it became too big to ban. A loophole that allowed them to scale a massive company. Is that okay? Did you get the idea? So you either use a different set of rules that is not the most obvious, such as the laws from the Netherlands for people who reside in Brazil, for example, or you leverage the ambiguity of the legal system by saying that something is not within the legal frameworks, and then you try to develop something out of this and try to make it legal later. The third one is the one I call the the next best, sorry. And if the first one, quick recap, is about crisscrossing systems, finding different pairings, and the second one is about rules, this one is about resources. It's about repurposing resources or recombining them in different ways. Would you like to choose one of the two? Whoever shouts first wins. Ruth Bader Ginsburg or the, sorry, what? Sorry, it's no, it's you. Did you choose this? Ah, okay. So this is a social entrepreneur called Topher White. He was he wasn't a social entrepreneur back then. He was traveling as a tourist in Borneo, and he realized one thing that I already told you, that people have mobile phones and we're constantly discarding mobile phones. How many mobile phones have you had?
In total?
Yeah.
Since their existence?
Yeah.
4.
4?
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. I had many more than that. You are a much better user than me. But we are constantly discarding phones, right, at a higher pace. And these phones are going to the bin, even if they are still usable. I changed my phone recently because the operational system was no longer working, but it was still working, the phone itself. So these phones are valuable resources, but they are in the bin. And one big problem that he noticed in Borneo was illegal logging. In tropical forests, has anyone been to a tropical forest? See some people nodding. Illegal logging is very difficult to monitor. And the reason for that is because, for example, satellite data captures big areas that are being deforested, but it's difficult to act in real time, to send people there to catch illegal loggers in the act. For that, you need drones, you need helicopters, you need patrols walking around. It's pretty challenging and pretty costly. And remember that most tropical forests are in low and middle income countries that do not have huge budgets. So what did he do? What was the workaround that he came up with? He took these phones that were going to waste, and he started putting them in tree canopies like this one. And they were charged by solar energy, so pretty cheap. And of course, there's no shortage of solar energy in a rainforest, so they were constantly charged. And the phones are constantly listening to the sounds of the forest. Phones do that already. They listen. So, and he created a very basic AI that distinguishes the sounds of birds, for example, or rainfall, from the sounds of chainsaws. So if the phone captures the sound of chainsaws, it sends a message to the patrol. And because the patrol gets a message from a specific phone, let's say that it's from this phone, they know the geolocation of where illegal logging is happening. And they can scatter these phones in a way that maximizes coverage in a forest, because each phone, say, captures about 1 or 2 kilometers radius of sound. So they maximize the coverage using many phones, and then patrols know exactly where it's happening. Very clever, right? Very scrappy workaround using something that was literally going to waste. How much time do I have? I don't know if I can cover more cases or if...
You have 15 minutes.
15.
But it should be good to hear about Ruth.
Ah, do you want to hear about Ruth? Okay. Do you all know Ruth Bader Ginsburg? See some people nodding. Well, so, in case you don't know about her, she became very famous as a Supreme Court justice in the United States who leaned progressive when the court leaned more conservative. And she became famous as well for her dissent of many court decisions in the US. But one thing that many people don't know about is that before becoming a Supreme Court justice, she tried to become a lawyer, but it was very difficult for her to do so, because even though she went to Harvard and Columbia and was one of the top students in her class, in her words, because she was a mother, Jewish, and a woman, she really struggled to get a job in a top law company in New York. Then she took a job as an adjunct at Rutgers University and started teaching a variety of courses and gradually became more interested in sex-based discrimination. Back then, the idea she had of sex-based discrimination was men and women, was binary, okay? And very influenced by Swedish feminists that thought that women carried a bigger workload and burden than their counterparts. She tried to take some cases in which women had been discriminated for their sex, but every time she went to court, the judges were men, and and it's crazy, like some of the court decisions explicitly say things like, this is not discrimination, women are fragile, we're just taking care of them, they're getting the best of two worlds. It's very difficult to convince a judge, a male judge, that their views were actually discriminatory. And how do you do that? How can you do that if most judges are men? Then she came across a case with her husband and with an association for civil rights of a man who was discriminated for his sex. It was a case of an accountant who was single and he cared for his elderly mother. If he were a woman, he would get a tax deduction because the law recognized that people who have caring responsibilities need some public incentives. But the law didn't recognize that men would have caring responsibilities. So he was not entitled to receiving that tax deduction because he was a man. It was a low stakes case, a small case of a man who was discriminated for his sex, very obvious and very clear to introduce to male judges. And long story short, they won that case. And what happens when you win a case like this? Can someone help me out? What? Yes.
There becomes a legal precedent that you can then use.
Exactly, you create a precedent. So they use that precedent in multiple cases in which women had been discriminated for their sex. Because with the case of a man who was discriminated for his sex, they proved that there was discrimination in legal practice. And that precedent was used multiple times later on in cases where women had been discriminated against by lawyers, policymakers, politicians, and so on and so forth. What does this teach us? First, resources don't have to be necessarily tangible resources. They can be legal cases, for example. It can be human capital. These are resources, very valuable resources, by the way. And we very often take resources by the design, right? We think of phones as something that you can send messages or call. You don't necessarily think that phones can be repurposed to work around some tough challenges and capture the sounds of chainsaws. There's a lot of stuff out there. If we think creatively about how to repurpose or recombine that stuff, we can reach really great results and big impact. And the final one I call the roundabout, and it's about self-reinforcing behaviors, or what we sometimes call positive feedback loops. I know I'm in a group of many very clever people and some that have already studied this. Can someone help me out? What is a self-reinforcing behavior? Yes. Exactly, yeah. So, and this is present in pretty much every system, social systems, technological, right? To give very basic examples, when I was a child, I fought a lot against my brother, my older brother. He would come and flick me, I would slap him, I would punch him, he would choke me, and then suddenly we were trying to kill each other. That's a self-reinforcing behavior. Or a landslide, a small rock knocks a bigger rock, that knocks a bigger rock, knocks a bigger rock, and then suddenly it's a landslide in a physical system. Biological system, the more I eat carbs, the more I feel like eating carbs because it changes my gut biome, and then it sends signal to my brain saying that I should eat more carbs, and I eat more carbs. But probably you work on something that involves self-reinforcing behaviors. And there are many out there that prevent us from addressing our challenges. I'm going to give you an example here that is one of the, it was the only workaround that I wasn't necessarily searching for. I literally bumped into this when trying to find other cases in Delhi, in India. Is anyone here from Delhi or has been to Delhi? Yes, you've been to Delhi. So you probably have seen something like this. In Delhi and many big cities in India, it's very common to see men urinating in public spaces. It's very normalized. So for example, on a wall, let's say that your house has a wall facing the street, it's probably going to get drenched in urine. It's very normalized. When I spoke with policemen, they said, oh, this is India. You know, men have done this for centuries and blah, blah, blah. So it's very normalized. It's treated as if it's inevitable, right? It's a self-reinforcing thing. So, and the more people urinate in public spaces, the more it becomes normal to urinate in public spaces, and the more people will. That's an example of self-reinforcing behavior. So what did these wall owners do that I thought was so clever? They started putting tiles of Hindu gods on the walls. So what is happening here? No one will drench a god in urine in a country where the majority of the population is Hindu, right? And then people stopped urinating on the walls. They diverted the stream to other walls, not to their wall. And by doing that, the wall became cleaner, cleaner, cleaner. And it's striking. Like you see walls like this that are very clean. Sometimes you cross the street and you see a wall that is very dirty. What did they do? They disturbed the self-reinforcing behavior. That was the dirtier the place gets, the more normalized it is to urinate there, and so on and so forth. Is that okay? Did you understand the idea of self-reinforcing behavior and how you can disturb them? Another case here was Charles House, was an employee at HP. You probably already had something from HP, or at least you know HP. Startups, when growing, sometimes become a bit more rigid, right? In the beginning, they have a lot of flexibility to experiment and to develop whichever ideas people have. But once the company grows, it becomes much harder to give that flexibility to people. Charles House was an employee that was at HP at that time that HP grew a lot. And he had an idea that he wanted to develop, but he knew that if he presented that idea to his boss, that was Packard, the P of HP, he would veto, because he wouldn't think that that was a priority for the company. So what did he do? He didn't tell his boss, and he started developing his idea autonomously underground. And when he started developing the idea, and some of you that have already worked with innovation, you notice that the innovation in the beginning, or the idea, is very rough. You don't know what is the product market fit, you don't know what is the design, but once the idea gains traction, you start seeing the prospects. And when he started seeing the prospects of that idea, he told his boss and other people at the company. And that ended up being one of the most lucrative innovations HP ever had. That was a large display screen. And similar approaches have been used to develop blue LED lights. Aspirin was developed like this with a workaround. Employees working around orders from their bosses to disturb a self-reinforcing behavior, a culture that was becoming more rigid, and then people think that they shouldn't be offering new ideas, and then it becomes more rigid. There are ways of studying that. And in fact, HP created a policy of about 10 to 15% of time for the employees to develop their own personal projects. It came out of experiences like this. 3M, many other companies have that, Google. So, workarounds. I know that sometimes people think of workarounds as patches that will not necessarily address the problem. I want to argue that they do. They address them differently. And they're very resourceful, they're very immediate, and they're great in complex situations. It reminds us that complex is different from complicated. Simple solutions like workarounds are excellent in complex situations. Don't try to come up with something very complicated in a complex situation, otherwise you will likely fail. And workarounds can also give you entry points to start developing that innovation further, or to start developing a business further. Many examples I gave here were, for example, multi-billion-dollar businesses that started out of a workaround. Of course, it wasn't only the workaround that happened there, but it gave them a very good starting point. It mobilized resources, it mobilized people, it gave them a way of standing out from others. It reminds us that we can be a bit more deviant. And I don't mean disobedient necessarily, because no one here disobeyed explicitly a rule. They worked around them. And it shows that there's much potential for thinking unconventionally and defying the status quo. Should I share with them the questions that I would like us to discuss?
No, not just yet. Yeah. So thank you very much, Paulo. Thank you very much, Paulo. Let's give him a round of applause.